Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone. They smile at you, but something feels off. Their words sound right, yet a chill runs down your spine. Their eyes don't quite match their expression, and their laughter seems to arrive a beat too late. In this moment, you're experiencing what the ancient Stoics might call the first whisper of discernment, the ability to see beyond appearances and perceive what truly lies beneath. This feeling, this subtle dissonance between what is presented and what is real, is not merely intuition but the beginning of wisdom. As Epictetus once observed, appearances to the mind are of four kinds. Things are what they appear to be, or they neither are, nor appear to be, or they are, but do not appear to be, or they are not, and yet appear to be. In our modern world, of carefully curated social media profiles and polished public personas, this ancient insight has never been more relevant. The Stoics understood that human interactions are layered with complexity. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, how much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it. When we sense inauthenticity in others, our first reaction might be frustration or judgment. Yet the Stoic path invites us to pause and consider, what masks might this person be wearing and why? What fears or insecurities might lie beneath their performance? More importantly, what masks do we ourselves wear? Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "You should live in such a way that there is nothing which you could not as easily tell your enemy as keep to yourself." This radical transparency with oneself forms the foundation of Stoic authenticity. As we begin this exploration of discernment, remember that the goal is not to become suspicious of everyone around us. Rather, it is to develop the clarity of perception that allows us to navigate relationships with wisdom, compassion, and integrity. The journey toward this clarity begins with a simple acknowledgement. Sometimes what we see is not what is. Throughout history, humans have worn masks, literal and figurative, for protection, deception, ritual, and transformation. The ancient Stoics recognized this tendency not as a modern phenomenon, but as an essential aspect of human nature. Seneca observed, "Everyone wears a mask in public and keeps his real character hidden inside." This insight wasn't meant as criticism, but as a recognition of our complex social nature. We present different aspects of ourselves in different contexts, with family, colleagues, strangers, or lovers. The question is not whether we wear masks, but whether we remain conscious of them and whether they serve virtue or vice. The Stoics distinguished between personas adopted for social function and those worn out of fear or deceit. Marcus Aurelius advised himself, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." This simple maxim cuts through the complexity of social performance and returns us to the essential question, does this mask serve truth? Consider how often in daily life we might respond, "I'm fine," when asked how we are, despite feeling anything but fine. This small mask seems harmless, even necessary for social smoothness. Yet the accumulation of such moments can distance us from our authentic experience and from genuine connection with others. The modern world has multiplied our masks exponentially. Social media platforms invite us to create carefully curated versions of ourselves. Professional environments often reward those who project confidence regardless of competence. Dating apps transform people into marketable products. As Epictetus might observe if he were alive today, it is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. This proliferation of masks creates a particular challenge for discernment. When everyone is performing, how do we recognize authenticity? The Stoics would suggest that the answer lies not in becoming more suspicious of others, but in becoming more honest with ourselves. "Dig within," Marcus Aurelius wrote. "Within is the wellspring of good, and it is always ready to bubble up, if you just dig." This inner work of self-knowledge creates the foundation for recognizing truth in others. When we understand our own masks, when we wear them consciously rather than compulsively, we develop the sensitivity to perceive others more clearly. What masks do you wear without awareness? What aspects of yourself do you hide, And from whom? These questions are not merely psychological but deeply philosophical, touching on how we define ourselves and how we relate to truth. Discernment, the ability to judge well, stands as one of the four cardinal virtues in Stoic philosophy, though they called it by another name, phronesis, or practical wisdom. This is not merely intellectual understanding, but the capacity to perceive clearly and act accordingly in the complexity of real life. Between stimulus and response there is a space, wrote Viktor Frankl, echoing Stoic principles. In that space is our power to choose our response. Discernment lives in this space, the pause between perception and judgment, between judgment and action. When we sense something amiss in another person's presentation, Stoic discernment invites us to create this space. Rather than immediately labeling them as dishonest or inauthentic, we might ask, what am I actually perceiving? What evidence supports my impression? What alternative explanations might exist? Epictetus taught, make it your practice to say to every harsh appearance, you are just an appearance and not at all what you appear to be. This applies not only to difficult circumstances but to our perceptions of others. The person who strikes us as fake may be struggling with social anxiety. The colleague whose enthusiasm seems forced might be trying to motivate themselves through a difficult period. Yet discernment is not naivety. The Stoics valued clear perception above all. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to look at things as they are, not as they appear to be. Sometimes, after careful consideration, we must acknowledge that someone is indeed being deceptive or manipulative. In such cases, Stoic wisdom offers guidance on how to respond. Seneca advised, the greatest remedy for anger is delay. When we detect deception, our immediate reaction might be anger or indignation. The discerning response is to pause, to consider our options, and to choose a path that aligns with virtue, rather than emotion. This might mean setting boundaries while maintaining compassion. It might mean disengaging from a harmful relationship while wishing the other person well. It might mean confronting deception directly, but without malice. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. The practice of discernment extends beyond individual relationships to our broader engagement with the world. In an age of misinformation and algorithmic manipulation, the ability to distinguish truth from falsehood becomes increasingly vital. The Stoic approach, questioning appearances, examining evidence, considering alternative explanations, and maintaining emotional equilibrium, offers a timeless framework for navigating this modern challenge. Before we can truly discern others, we must first know ourselves. The Delphic maxim, know thyself, embraced by Socrates and the Stoics who followed him, remains the cornerstone of wisdom. Yet genuine self-knowledge is perhaps the most challenging form of discernment. I will keep constant watch over myself, wrote Seneca, and, most usefully, will put each day up for review. This practice of self-examination was not occasional but daily for the serious Stoic. Each evening, they would review their actions, words, and thoughts, asking, where did I go wrong? What did I do right? What could I have done better? This rigorous self-reflection serves as the foundation for discerning others. When we understand our own tendencies toward self-deception, we become more sensitive to similar patterns in those around us. When we recognize our own masks, we develop an eye for the masks worn by others. Consider how often our judgments of others reveal more about ourselves than about them. When someone's behavior triggers a strong emotional reaction in us, the Stoic approach is to turn inward first. What does my response reveal about my own values, fears, or unexamined beliefs? Marcus Aurelius practiced this consistently. When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger. This is not to absolve others of responsibility, but to ensure that our perceptions aren't clouded by projection or unexamined bias. The mirror of self-reflection also helps us recognize when our desire for connection might override our discernment. We sometimes ignore red flags in relationships because we want so badly for someone to be who they present themselves to be. Epictetus cautioned against this tendency. It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. When we believe we already know someone, especially early in a relationship, we may miss crucial information that contradicts our desired perception. Self-reflection reveals another challenge to discernment, our tendency to see what we expect to see. Confirmation bias, the inclination to notice evidence that supports our existing beliefs while overlooking contradictory information, was well understood by the Stoics, though they didn't use this modern term. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact, wrote Marcus Aurelius. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. This humility about our own perceptions creates space for more accurate discernment. When we acknowledge the limitations of our perspective, we become more willing to revise our judgments in light of new information. The practice of self-reflection isn't merely retrospective. It involves developing real-time awareness of our thoughts, emotions, and reactions as they arise. This mindful presence, what the Stoics might call prosauche or attention, allows us to catch ourselves in moments of projection, assumption, or emotional reactivity that might cloud our discernment. While discerning inauthenticity is valuable, equally important is the ability to recognize genuine authenticity when we encounter it. The Stoics, with their emphasis on virtue and character, offer guidance on identifying the markers of a truly authentic person. You will know them by their fruits, goes the biblical saying, and the Stoics would agree. Authentic people demonstrate consistency between their words and actions. As Seneca observed, the person who says one thing but does another will eventually lose credibility even with themselves. This consistency isn't perfection. Even the wisest Stoics acknowledge their ongoing struggles, but rather a transparent acknowledgement of one's imperfections coupled with sincere effort toward improvement. Authentic individuals also display what the Stoics prized as ataraxia, a kind of equanimity or tranquility that comes from inner alignment. When someone's internal values match their external behavior, they exhibit a natural ease that cannot be convincingly feigned for long. Marcus Aurelius described this quality. No man can escape his destiny, the next inquiry being how he may best live the time that he has to live. This acceptance of reality, including one's own limitations, manifests as a lack of defensiveness. Authentic people can acknowledge mistakes without excessive shame or elaborate justification. They can receive feedback without collapsing or counterattacking. As Epictetus taught, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Another sign of authenticity is appropriate vulnerability. The Stoics didn't advocate emotional suppression, but rather emotional regulation. An authentic person can share their struggles and uncertainties when appropriate, without using vulnerability as a manipulation tactic or oversharing in ways that burden others. They understand, as Seneca wrote, that to share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable. To make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength. Perhaps most tellingly, authentic people demonstrate genuine curiosity about others. Those wearing masks are often too preoccupied with managing impressions to be truly present and interested in those around them. Authentic individuals, by contrast, can set aside their own agenda to listen and learn. As Epictetus advised, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. The Stoics would also point to how a person handles power as a revealing test of character. If you want to know what a man's like, take a good look at how he treats his inferiors, not his equals, Seneca observed. Those who are kind to peers, but dismissive of those who can offer them nothing, reveal a conditional authenticity that is no authenticity at all. Finally, authentic people maintain perspective about themselves. They neither inflate their importance nor diminish their worth. They can laugh at themselves without self-deprecation. They acknowledge their achievements without arrogance. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself despite being emperor of Rome, how worthless are these poor people who pretend to understand matters of philosophy. Some of them are mere sawdust and mud. In our quest for discernment, perhaps no skill is more essential than the ability to be fully present. The Stoics emphasized prosauche, attention or mindfulness, as the foundation of philosophical practice. Only by attending closely to what is actually happening, rather than to our projections or assumptions, can we perceive others accurately. Attend to the matter before you, Marcus Aurelius instructed himself, whether it is an opinion or an act or a word. This quality of attention allows us to notice the subtle inconsistencies that might indicate someone is not being authentic, the micro-expressions that contradict spoken words, the patterns of behavior that don't align with stated values, the small promises repeatedly broken. Modern research confirms what the Stoics intuited. Our attention is limited and easily hijacked. In an age of constant distraction, cultivating presence requires deliberate practice. When we're half listening to someone while checking our phone or mentally rehearsing our response, we miss crucial information. When we're preoccupied with our own concerns, we fail to notice what's happening right in front of us. Epictetus advised his students to make it your business to draw out the best in others by being an attentive listener. This attentiveness serves two purposes. It provides more accurate information for discernment, and it creates the conditions for authentic connection. When people feel truly heard, they're more likely to reveal their authentic selves rather than presenting a polished facade. The practice of presence also helps us distinguish between our immediate impressions and our judgments about those impressions. Between stimulus and response there is a space, wrote Viktor Frankl, echoing Stoic principles. In that space is our power to choose our response. When we're fully present, we can notice our reactions arising, the internal flinch when something feels off, the subtle tension when words don't match actions, without immediately jumping to conclusions. Seneca emphasized this distinction. What is important is not what you bear, but how you bear it. Applied to discernment, this suggests that what matters is not just what we perceive about others, but how we process and respond to those perceptions. The practice of presence creates space for this processing to happen consciously rather than reactively. Being present also allows us to notice patterns over time. A single inconsistency might be meaningless, but a repeated pattern reveals character. As Aristotle, admired by the Stoics, observed, "We are what we repeatedly do." Only through sustained attention can we discern these patterns accurately. 3D. Stoics would recognize that presence is particularly challenging in our digital age, where interactions are often mediated through screens. Text messages lack tone, social media presents curated versions of lives, and video calls capture only a fraction of the nonverbal cues we rely on for discernment. In these contexts, presence requires additional effort, reading carefully, asking, clarifying questions, and maintaining awareness of the medium's limitations. Finally, presence allows us to remain open to revision. When we're fully attentive, we notice when new information contradicts our initial impressions. The person we judged as inauthentic might reveal unexpected depth. The one we trusted implicitly might show concerning inconsistencies. As Marcus Aurelius advised, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. I seek the truth which never harmed anyone." Setting boundaries might mean explicitly naming what you've observed. "I've noticed that what you say often differs from what you do, and this makes it difficult for me to trust you." It might mean reducing contact or ending a relationship entirely. It might mean changing the nature of a relationship, moving someone from the inner circle of trust to a more peripheral position in your life. The Stoics would emphasize that boundaries should be established without malice. Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, Marcus Aurelius advised, ask yourself the following question: what fault of mine most resembles the one I'm about to criticize? This self-reflection ensures that our boundaries come from discernment rather than judgment, from wisdom rather than wounded pride. Seneca noted that the greatest remedy for anger is delay. When we realize someone has been inauthentic with us, our immediate reaction might be hurt or anger. The Stoic approach is to pause, to let these initial emotions settle, and then to determine the appropriate boundary from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. This doesn't mean suppressing legitimate feelings. As Epictetus taught, It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Acknowledging our hurt or disappointment is part of honest self-awareness. The key is to not let these emotions dictate our response, but rather to let them inform a response guided by reason and virtue. Boundaries also protect our capacity for compassion. When we clearly delineate what we will and won't accept, we create the conditions under which we can maintain goodwill toward others despite their flaws. Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness, Seneca wrote. Boundaries allow us to remain kind without becoming victims. Perhaps most importantly, boundaries preserve our integrity. The Stoics valued internal consistency. Above all, alignment between beliefs, words, and actions. When we tolerate persistent inauthenticity in our relationships without response, we compromise our own commitment to truth. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Sometimes the right thing is to acknowledge when a relationship lacks the foundation of truth necessary for genuine connection. The ultimate goal of Stoic discernment is not to divide the world into the authentic and inauthentic, the trustworthy and untrustworthy. Rather, it is to develop the wisdom to navigate relationships with clarity, compassion, and integrity, to integrate discernment into a life well lived. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be, Marcus Aurelius wrote. Be one. This simple directive points to the heart of Stoic philosophy. Knowledge must be embodied in action. Understanding the principles of discernment is merely the beginning. Living them daily is the work of a lifetime. Integration begins with self-honesty. No man was ever wise by chance, wrote Seneca. The wisdom to discern authenticity in others grows from our willingness to recognize our own tendencies toward performance, people-pleasing, or self-deception. As we become more honest with ourselves, we naturally develop greater sensitivity to honesty in others. This integration requires balance. The Stoics prize the golden mean, the middle path between extremes. In practicing discernment, we seek balance between naive trust and paranoid suspicion, between rigid judgment and boundaryless acceptance. As Epictetus taught, it is the action of an uninstructed person to blame others for his own bad condition. It is the action of one who has begun to be instructed to lay the blame on himself, and of one whose instruction is completed, neither to blame another nor himself. Integration also means applying discernment appropriately across different relationships. Not every interaction requires the same depth of authenticity. We rightfully expect more transparency from a spouse than from a cashier, more consistency from a close friend than from an acquaintance. The wise person, in the Stoic view, understands these contexts and adjusts expectations accordingly. Perhaps most challenging is integrating discernment with compassion. When we perceive inauthenticity in others, the Stoic response is not contempt but understanding. How much more harmful are the consequences of anger and grief than the circumstances that arouse them in us? Marcus Aurelius observed. People wear masks for many reasons: fear, insecurity, past trauma, social conditioning. Recognizing this doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior, but it does mean responding with humanity rather than hostility. The integrated practice of discernment transforms how we move through the world. We become less reactive to others' performances and more responsive to their essence. We develop what Seneca called constantia, steadiness of soul, that allows us to remain centered regardless of whether others present their authentic selves or carefully constructed facades. This steadiness creates the conditions for genuine connection. When we are secure in our own authenticity and skilled in discernment, we create safe spaces where others can gradually lower their masks. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. Yet he followed this with compassion. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. The integrated Stoic recognizes both the prevalence of masks and the universal human longing for authentic connection beneath them. This recognition allows us to move through a world of performance with neither naivety nor cynicism, but with the grounded wisdom that comes from knowing both others and ourselves. As Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." The path of integration is one of continuous learning, about ourselves, about others, about the complex dance of authenticity and performance that characterizes human interaction. In this learning lies not just protection from deception, but the possibility of deeper, more meaningful connection. The ancient Stoics could not have imagined our modern world of digital personas and carefully curated social media presences. Yet, their wisdom speaks directly to our contemporary challenges. In a world where appearances often supersede reality, the practice of discernment becomes not just a philosophical exercise, but an essential skill for living well. Remember, the mask that matters most is the one you might be wearing yourself. As you develop the art of discernment toward others, turn that same clear-eyed attention inward. In Seneca's words, "The first step towards amendment is the recognition of error." When we recognize and remove our own masks, we create the possibility for others to do the same. And in that mutual unveiling lies the potential for the authentic connection we all ultimately seek.